Attention, attention please. Stand by for another episode of
When Humanists Attack.
And welcome back to When Humanists Attack. My name is Roger Kimmel Smith, and we're continuing my conversation with my old pal, Eric Kaplan, aka Ralph Snodgrass, aka Mel Shanks, prominent television comedy writer and author of the very humorous book, Does Santa Exist? A philosophical investigation. We find comedy near, if not at, the center of your worldview. Would it be too much to say toward the center of your cosmology? You know, you do cover the topic of comedy quite extensively in the Santa book. Does Santa exist? You pose comedy as a sort of alternative path to the paths of logic and of mysticism.
What I like about comedy is that it enables one to take in, I would almost say, more data, that we don't need to limit ourselves to one coherent way of looking at our lives, but we can.
Kierkegaard again.
Yeah, we can sense in the contradiction. You can have pets and still be a vegetarian. And in a sense, in certain circumscribed circumstances, that's okay. Now, is it always okay? That's perhaps a question for another time, because it's a hard one. But I do think that one of the advantages of comedy is it enables a sort of forgiving, charitable approach to our own internal multiplicity. And it also enables us to have a forgiving, tolerant approach to our neighbors and our brothers and sisters and their multiplicity and how they're different from us. So I am guardedly pro comedy.
It is the smiling face, in that duality.
Yeah.
What you're saying also, I'm reminded of Zhuangzi, who had
very funny man. Yes.
Yes, who was the funniest, of the scriptural writers that I know of around the world, but also very much about, it could have come straight from him: hang in the contradiction, gain the maximal experience from every opportunity to do so, but stand aside from it. He has this thing about the hinge of Tao or Taos, where you could sort of watch them all and experience them all, but, not be shaken by them.
Yeah. Great man. Wonderful man, as my dad would say. Wonderful.
One of the reasons I wanted to get you on this thread is that I see the comic as humanistic, a humanistic angle on or approach to the larger or ultimate questions that, are often called the questions of religion.
I had a teacher once, Stanley Cavell, who said that there's nothing more human than to try to not be human. But look, yes, I agree with you.
I'm reminded of the last conversation we had on the phone a couple of days ago, which I'll disclose was you and my first phone conversation in decades.
Yeah.
You said something like our conception of the human and our conception of the divine have always co-evolved in a kind of dialectic.
Well, if I said that, I must have been cooking with gas, because I think that's true.
It could also perhaps be called a kind of romance. It reminds me of, the pagan side of my triplicate identity, where the sun and the earth have this dialectic that is essentially, romantic and generative.
Yeah. John Dewey used to tell us to watch out for this thing called the observer theory of knowledge. And the way I think about that is very about what it would mean to avoid the observer theory of knowledge is very much simpatico with what you just said, which is the world and we are making love to each other. We're involved in this erotic relationship with each other, and that is generative, and creating new possibilities, new worlds, new conceptions of humanity, new gods. If you're a writer and you're going to work on someone else's show, it's almost like they have made the chess set, and they're like, there's 2 horses and there's white and there's black and there's 64 squares, and now you can play a game, but you're not making the chess pieces. What I found was an exciting possibility on the Big Bang Theory was that people were both trying to understand the world and they had love lives. So they were both. They were both people trying to think about their place in the world and people trying to find intimate affection. And I found that that was a good grist for my contradiction mill, because people could think one thing, but they could express something different in their emotional lives. And I liked writing about a physicist falling in love with a neurobiologist and what that had to say about the relative priority of their fields and things like that. And then at the end of it, I came up with something which I liked, which was there's this concept in physics of that broken symmetries need to be explained. And I was like, why do symmetries need to be explained? Why do we assume, why do asymmetries need to be explained? Why do we assume that the universe is symmetrical and have to come up with a reason why it's asymmetrical?
That sounds like Platonic prejudice.
It is. It's an ancient Greek religious idea that the most perfect things are symmetrical, or it's just a religious / aesthetic idea. If you look at wabi-sabi, Japanese stuff, which is, all kind of grotty and muddy and asymmetrical like a cloud. If you're doing physics from that background, you wouldn't feel the need to say, why is the world asymmetrical? It's like, why wouldn't it be asymmetrical? So that's what in the finale of the Big Bang, Sheldon and Amy win their Nobel for, is a theory of super asymmetry. That there's quantum physics nowadays is about supersymmetry, and they develop a theory of super asymmetry. And I asked some physicists, we had consultants on the show. I was like, is there anything wrong with this? Like, is there a reason why physics couldn't turn out to go in the direction of super asymmetry? And they said no. But then I was worried, well, surely someone has come up with the phrase super asymmetry before and beat me to it, but they hadn't. So we did create the notion of the ultimate explanation of reality being that it's a fundamentally asymmetrical world, which is, it's a cockeyed way of looking at things. So I was happy that kind of brought together physics and comedy in a satisfying way.
What about in the writer's room? Where's the clash of comedy and philosophy there? Is there, do you kind of have a shared viewpoint among your colleagues, or is there more tension?
My colleagues are reasonably interested in philosophy, but less interested in philosophy than I am. And if it's philosophy on the table, they tend to say, Eric, what should we say about philosophy that will not make us look like we don't know what we're talking about? Writing is very much sort of a craft of storytelling, more than it's taking ideology and trying to cram it down the audience's throat. So 99.99% of the work in the writer's room is like, well, what could be a story that we could tell with these characters that will be funny and interesting and will make the people watching it feel something? And once somebody says, well, I don't know, what if Leonard decides he's going to tell his mother that he's angry at her when she comes to visit, but when she comes to visit, he's afraid. I was like, well, that sounds interesting, and that sounds emotionally complex enough to get people to care. And then it's figuring out what could happen next, So it's much more following the, almost like Zhuangzi's Butcher. It's much more following the flow of the real emotion and the real reality than it is trying to impose an agenda on the audience.
Right.
And
it sounds like it's also sort of, I know you were and maybe still are into D&D and dungeon mastering. So you used the illusion earlier to playing a game with the characters, with the limited functionalities of each character, so that am I on the right track here?
Absolutely.
That's what's
So when
going
I
on.
was a kid, I had when I went to like a zoo or a museum, my parents would let me get a souvenir. And the souvenir was usually a rubber animal of some kind made in Hong Kong. So I had a bat, I had a couple of snakes, I had a pangolin actually, and I had them in a. Remember we went to Creative Day Camp?
I
So
do remember.
I had them in a bag for a Creative Day Camp bag. And I watched a lot of Star Trek, the original series. So I would play, and if I was a girl, this would be called playing with dolls. And it was playing with dolls, but it is gendered. So I didn't consider it playing with dolls. I considered it playing with my rubber animals. And I would tell stories that were sort of derivative of Star Trek. Like I don't remember if I think the bat was the captain. And it was funny, these things were made of such a sort of a crappy rubber that all the appendages would fall off. So they got, abraded by my play. And a long slinky that had gotten tangled up was the science officer, and the bat was the captain. I don't remember who the pangolin was, and they would have various adventures. That's just what writing is. It's just a grown-up version, only instead of a rubber bat, I could have Jim Parsons.
In the Santa book, you sort of put the reader on one level while using the Santa framework to go at all sorts of real live, and very deep philosophical questions about what approaches are worthwhile.
I described the book as a sort of a workbook, that it's called Does Santa Exist? But it's about things that we're not sure if we believe in. And I instruct the reader to take whatever they're not sure if they believe in, whether it's God or love or democracy, and do a search and replace. And if you're worried about if romantic love exists, you should take the book and take a Sharpie and cross out Santa and call the book Does Romantic Love Exist? And just keep reading it like that. Because one of the things I noticed was there was a certain religious fury building in our country and in our world. And people had this fury towards each other based upon, I would say, rejecting a part of themselves that they then projected on the other and scapegoated the other. And I wanted to lower the emotional temperature of discussions about religion. I wanted people to be able to say in a more loving way to each other that they had had a revelation that the world or the cosmos was a certain way, but that maybe their neighbor had a different such revelation.
So colleges and universities seem to be now a vector for the virus, very unfortunately. And made me think of a work of yours, which I know only the title of, but maybe you want to say more. Zombie College.
Oh, yeah, I like Zombie College. Zombie College was from an early iteration of internet entertainment when it could only be these very simple flash cartoons. And the concept of Zombie College was it's a world in which brain-eating zombies exist, but people are sort of okay with it. And the idea came to me, I think, roughly around the time that I was in a car accident. And I was like, whoa, why do we do this? How can people live in a world where, I think it's like 40,000 Americans die on the road every year, something like that, like significantly larger than the number of people who died in the September 11th attacks die in car accidents, and many more are injured. Actually, I wasn't injured, but I was just like, I could have been, or I could have injured somebody else. And I thought this human ability to pretend that horrific things aren't happening or don't matter is really fascinating. So
Into
Zombie
your
College
normal.
is kind of about that. Yeah, to normalize the abnormal. So Zombie College is about that with a love story as well, you know.
I could ask you about what it's like to own a visual effects studio, how that
An
came about,
animation
how you've been
studio.
using it. And
Animation studio more than visual effects. Although we do visual effects as well. Well, one of the things I like about it is the ability to make sort of budget and tech decisions in the same head, in this case, mine or mine plus the client, with artistic decisions. So it's nice to be able to think, well, here's the budget. What kind of trade-offs am I willing to make within that budget to achieve a particular artistic goal? So I like that. I like being able to say, well, it turns out that backgrounds are really expensive, but character designs are less expensive. So if we can have fewer places where the characters go, we can have more characters. Or that this particular comedy doesn't require sophisticated animation. It just requires a pose and then a snap to the next pose. So therefore, the amount of time that someone needs to spend animating it can be less, and therefore maybe we can achieve this comedic story for a network that has a smaller budget than we'd like, or than ideal. But there's still a way to work within those constraints. So that's what I like about it. I like being able to make the fiscal, technological, and creative decisions as part of a single system.
can you talk about a project?
The thing we did that is our sort of crown jewel that I'm most proud of is the Drinky Crow Show, which is based on an underground comic strip called Mackey's, created by Tony Millionaire. And while I put a lot of my own sort of writing chops into the story and the character development, the world and the chess set were created by Tony. Some of it had to do with contractual obligations, that there were times when I was working on shows where I was exclusive as a writer to that show. So I wasn't writing the projects that I was doing through Morari.
It sounds like you have developed in your career more towards full producer, or are you still very largely centered on a writer's identity?
The second, producers in TV are largely writers, and in large part, I think because of the demands of time, it's a very writer-centric medium, as opposed to features, which are a director-centric medium. So being a producer in TV largely means that you're writing a script, and then if someone is going to make that script, that you're involved in the decisions of casting and set design, costume, stuff like that. But it's basically writing. I mean, and if you think about it, writing is sort of creating the blueprint for the house. So it speaking as a writer, it makes sense that we should be in charge, because we write the blueprint for the house and then we figure out what kind of wood and what the color the carpet should be and all that. I'm sure a director will tell you why I'm wrong, but he's not on your show, so what's he going to do? Chaw raw beef.
I wonder how you developed your chops on story structure type stuff. Because you always you could always just spell out ideas, and take them somewhere, but story structure is different.
I definitely think the way you develop any kind of skill is you care enough about it to try and do it. And if you fail, you feel bad. I thought that character was going to be likable, but everybody has told me they hate him. Oh, well, that's too bad. I guess I'll try again. But the sort of, it's like the Taoist thing, that the explanation is not going to be as data rich as the real reason, because anytime something succeeds, I can tell you very clearly why it doesn't succeed. I can say, like, take your favorite thing and I'll explain to you why it doesn't work. So that means the explanation is not, it's not fine-grained enough to capture the success or failure.
We're wired to associate the intellect with the critical stance.
Maybe there's a way to rewire ourselves where the intellect is more creative and less critical.
There is the notion of the difference between the writer and the editor. You can't have both hats on at the same time. I imagine that in the writer's room, you have to, especially if you have the executive producer hat.
It's fun to be able to just be spontaneous and just say a bunch of stuff and then have somebody else have the job of saying, Eric, you went too crazy, dial it back.
Right.
Rather than, you're right, to have to observe yourself, like pull yourself back and let yourself go at the same time is challenging.
Even Zhuangzi has trouble with that one.
Even Zhuangzi, and look how wise he was. By the way, I became a Chinese philosopher because my book was translated into Chinese.
Hey, there you go.
I have no idea what they make of it in China. Like, I'd be curious to know, like, to talk to someone who read it in Chinese, like, what, why do you like this? Did you like it? What did you think?
I even wonder what they know about the whole Santa bullshit.
That's a good question. But yeah, but I did get a call from my publishers, like, we're selling really well in China. Okay. But I went through some pages and it's a good translation.
How do you know?
How do I know? I think I just maybe used a little bit of Google Translate or something. I don't know. I don't know how I reached that. As those words were leaving my lips, I was like, why do you think that? But I do think it.
And you know about the War with Grandpa movie, I assume.
Oh yeah, congratulations. That's exciting. When does that actually come out?
Oh, they're still using October 9th as the date. And I imagine that somewhere in the United States, there are screens that are open.
Right. And will they also release it on a streaming service?
I think we're waiting to see. The producers have the rights. They're this couple, Marvin and Rosa Peart, who were, somewhere in the Weinstein universe. Originally a Weinstein project slated for release in 2017.
Robert De Niro, you couldn't do better.
I've seen it. It is very good. He didn't use any of my dad's jokes, which was a sensible decision. The genesis of the situation, as he always would tell the story when asked by school children, was shortly after we had moved into the Rugby Road house. I was delighted to live there and told them, I love living here. I love this room. I don't want to ever live anyplace else. I would have been maybe 7 at this time. And so my father just immediately hatched on the idea of depriving your character of the thing he loves the most.
And but the
built
character
story
is
off of
not
that.
based on you exactly. It's a fantasy character.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I would say in the book, he modeled some of the kids' friends on his notion, I think, of you. And
oh, I'm in this movie? Who's based on me?
You're not in the movie.
But I might be in the book.
The friend situation is entirely different. It's this big Hollywood director type, Tim Hill, did The War with Grandpa. He did the SpongeBob movie.
Oh, I like the SpongeBob movie, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, this is good to know. But they opened up the War with Grandpa book in terms of giving the grandpa character, who in the book really was just sort of the sad widow, and we only saw him within the context of the house, the kid's house. At least here, they gave him a couple of friends who are played by Cheech Marin and Christopher Walken.
All right.
They become this sort of geezer crew. There's this big dodgeball scene they play against the kids, and also give him a budding love interest, who's the Jane Seymour character. The genesis of the project was that the 8-year-old son of Marvin and Rosa Payart said, "Hey, this is a good book. Why don't you adapt it?"
Oh, good for him. Well, he should get a producer credit.
And they gave him executive producer line.
Nice.
In the cut I saw, in fact, he was on screen for about a 45-second introduction to the film before it screened.
That's exciting. And then the Parrots took it to the Weinsteins, and the Weinsteins took it to De Niro.
Yes, I suppose.
That's nice.
Yeah, I don't know how to.
Good for your dad, because he lived long enough to know that this was happening, right?
Oh, yes, for sure. And to decide that he didn't want to try to involve himself because they weren't particularly asking him to. And so he was rather comfortable, it seemed to me, just letting the project go. But I do think when we had the opportunity to watch, a nearly final cut, he did so.
Good.
I hope he liked it.
Good. That's good.
Funny, Eric, Linus Kaplan, what a delightful and awesome and wide-ranging conversation. And what a delight to see you after so long.
It was a pleasure, Roger. I really appreciate you reaching out.
Thank you for joining us on When Humanists Attack. And thank you, YouTube subscribers, for tuning in to When Humanists Attack. Do all the things, like and follow and obey, won't you? Or just have a nice day.